Inside this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I edit a full wedding in Lightroom from start to finish in a couple of hours, and how you can edit your own photos to get the look that you see in these edits here. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get right into it. Alright, this is a real wedding I shot in Cabo last year, and it has almost 20,000 raw images. And I'm going to show you the exact workflow I use, as well as the tools that I use to actually make my editing faster. So, if I'm going too fast or too slow for you, you can actually adjust the playback in YouTube. On a keyboard, you can do that by hitting Shift period to speed up, or Shift comma to slow things down. Now, culling your photos is honestly one of the most important parts of editing. So I really want to quickly cover what my workflow looks like that gets me through 15,000 or 20,000 photos in about an hour or two instead of all day long. So let's start culling. You can cull your photos in Lightroom, but I actually use a program called Photo Mechanic because it loads photos a lot faster. And if every photo that you are looking at takes an extra second to load on your screen, with 15,000 photos to go through, that's 15,000 seconds. And that would actually work out to 4 hours of just waiting around for your screen to load. So using Photo Mechanic saves me a lot of time. Now, here are the photos from the day, and I'm going to open them in full screen, and then I'm going to do my first culling pass. Now, the first time I go through these photos, I'm focused on moving as fast as I can. It's all about speed, so I'll scroll through as fast as possible, and every photo that I like, I mark it as a keeper. And I just do this with the one key on my keyboard, but you can mark it whatever you want. 1 star, 5 stars, green, blue, yellow, it doesn't matter. I don't worry about having a bunch of duplicates at this stage either. I'll make sure that I make those final decisions on my next pass, because if I actually sit here in this first pass and I obsess over every single photo and which of a duplicate I want to keep, and I'm zooming in on every image, it's actually going to take forever. So I'll go with my gut and I'll scroll through, and if I'm torn between 2 duplicates, I'll just select them both, and then I'll make the decision on my second pass. Now, you can totally do this whole thing with your keyboard, but I've actually got a Tourbox Elite Plus set up here to make it a little bit more efficient. So the big benefit for me is that this thing lets me map all of my most used controls in one place. So for a big job like a wedding, shaving off even a fraction of a second on 20,000 photos saves a lot of time. And since Tourbox has actually become a genuine part of how I edit, I actually ended up partnering with them on this video. So if you're curious and you want to check it out, there's a link in the description. Okay, now when I finish my first pass, I've actually narrowed it down from those 15,000 photos to a couple of thousand, which is still way too many to send to a client for a couple of reasons. First, editing 2,000 photos takes 3 times longer than if I narrow it down to, say, the best 700. Second, you can give your client 10 identical photos, and you're going to find that instead of being grateful for that, you're actually turning their experience into a job, because now they have to go through and spend hours picking the ones that they like. So I'll go through and I'll choose 1 or maybe 2 very similar photos in a set. In general, I go with the photo that has the best emotion, but if I have 2 that are both great, then I'll choose the one that is, the most flattering for the bride, and then maybe the most flattering for the groom. And if they're both flattering, then I just go with the one that has a little bit more, sharpness or is a little bit better composition. I'll also say one big tip I'd give you is editing on a bigger screen. So I'm actually using a 27-inch desktop most of the time when I'm culling and when I'm editing. It makes it way easier to see the details without having to zoom into the image, and choosing photos is a bit easier. So once I've finally narrowed down my finished selected photos, I'm going to transfer all of those selects into a folder on my hard drive marked keepers or selects, and everything else I'm going to put in a folder marked rejects. I just want to make sure that at every stage of the editing process, all my files are both backed up and organized. Now after that, I'm going to take those selects and we're going to go into Lightroom to actually start working through the edit. Now, I chunk my editing workflow up in kind of the same way as my culling. I'm not trying to do everything, every stage of the edit all at once. Instead, I actually want to start with really broad batch edits and then work my way down to the more and more specific stuff. So I've got all the photos imported into Lightroom here. Now I've gone ahead and applied some 5 stars to different photos from different parts of the day. And I've done this because I want to find a preset that works across as much of the wedding as I possibly can. So I'm going to open these photos up and start applying some of my base sets from my Fuji 200 pack, which is the one that I am leaning towards for this wedding and that I've been using recently. I really love the way it makes the greens pop. So let's go ahead and just test a few different presets on a few different parts of the day. And taking a couple extra minutes here before you start editing is going to save you a lot of time, because you can go ahead and see which preset kind of does the best job all around, and that's just going to save you making more adjustments. So taking a few more seconds here to figure out what actually works the best is definitely worth the time. So overall, I am leaning towards this Cool Greens 2 preset. So I'm going to go with this preset across the photos, and I'm going to just tweak these tones just a little bit with some color grading. So I like this tone 3 warm, and if I zoom way in, you're going to see it's pretty subtle. But what it's really doing to the skin is it's just making it a little bit less magenta, a little bit less rosy, and a little bit more towards the yellow-orange side of things, which to me feels a little bit more authentic and more film-like and less kind of digital. So I'm going to dial that in maybe to about 50%. And lastly, I'm going to try adding some film conversion. So I'm going to zoom in here again so you can see what's going on. Here's before and here's after. You can see it's really, really strong. We could also try film convert 2 and see if that's any different. So I'm going to go with probably the film convert 2, but we'll dial it back until you can just see the grain on their pores. Basically, I want it to kind of soften the skin, but I don't want to be able to like see the grain visibly unless I'm zoomed in like this. So here's before and here's after. And if you want to grab these presets, I will leave a link in the description, but just because I hate it when people post tutorials and you have to buy the presets to use them, you can pause the video at any point here and copy these settings so that you have this kind of base look for yourself, okay? So just go ahead, pause the video, copy these settings, and you'll be able to get a look that is pretty similar to what's going on here. So that's the profile. Here's the before, here's the after. I'm feeling good about that. Now let's go ahead and grab all the images. I'm going back to my grid view by hitting G key on my keyboard. I'm going to select all the photos by hitting Command A, and then I'm going to go ahead and sync everything except for white balance and exposure so that I have just a base setting that is exactly the same across every single photo. Now, at this point, if you want to speed up your editing a little bit and your computer's kind of slow, you could go back to your grid view in your library, and you could go ahead and go up to Library, Previews, and Generate Smart Previews. Now, what that's going to do is build smaller files that your computer can actually edit faster while you're editing in the Develop module. So let's get started editing. I've got my first image here, and you're going to see I'm using the Tourbox to edit my photos because it actually lets me speed up my editing quite a bit by having things like my temperature on this knob. I've got my tint on this one here, and I've got my exposure right over here. So it's super simple for me to edit the basic parts of my image, then hit next. And same thing, I can adjust my temperature and my exposure really, really quickly, saving me a lot of time. And then if I want to do things like actually add a radial adjustment or an adjustment brush, it's just one button away, and I can quickly do things like increase the highlights and add some saturation to that part of the photo. Perfect, just like that. Let's move on. And what's really cool about the Tourbox is I can actually assign things that Lightroom doesn't normally have keyboard shortcuts for. So for example, this photo here, let's say I wanted to remove the hawk. Well, I can easily click this button here, which will instantly pull up my object removal tool. And then I don't have to navigate with my mouse over to this panel and hit object removal. It's just one button away and I can remove things from my image. In the same way, I can do subject selection. I hit this button, pulls up my subject selection, and it just lets me do it a little bit faster than if I had to manually go in here, hit K on my keyboard, create new mask, and select subject. So I just wanted to cover that because it does make a big difference in my workflow. It's an important tool. And if you're traveling, if you're someone who edits on a smaller screen like I occasionally do, it's also helpful that you can go into full screen editing mode with the Tourbox because it has this floating window here that will actually show whatever tool you're editing and adjusting. So kind of cool. And that's what I'm using for my editing process. Now let's get started and actually edit these photos together. So basic edits are always going to be just my exposure and my temperature. I'm not going to worry about getting everything completely perfect on my first pass. I just want to get like the rough settings dialed in. And then that way, in my next pass, that's when I'm going to kind of compare my images, make sure everything is consistent, maybe add some adjustment brushes, things like that. Now with this photo, when it's necessary and it's also quick, I'm going to do things like add a radial filter here and there. Because in this particular one, if I go like that, drop my contrast and raise my highlights and my whites, I can get a really nice detail shot of those rings. So here's before and here's after. So really great editing is about kind of removing things that are distracting more than it is about adding things that weren't there to begin with. And so just making sure we get our tint correct. Okay, this one's pretty good, but I am again going to add a radial filter just like that. And I'm actually going to use this pre-made brush that I've saved called Brooding Dehaze Darken. And I'm going to invert it so it's on the rest of the mask, not on the dress. And then it's just going to darken down the rest of the image so your eyes are drawn more towards the dress itself and less towards the other parts of the room that aren't really the main focus, right? So let's go like that and maybe raise the exposure just a little. That's it. So my basic goal here is to keep my edits under 10 seconds per photo. And the reason for that is because I have about 800 images, and if I can keep it under 10 seconds, that's about 2 hours to get through an entire wedding from start to finish. And so for the most part, I'm not going in and doing this kind of masking unless I really need to. Like on the bride here, obviously her particular skin tone in this particular room with that particular light was just not looking good. So I need to go in there and just manually adjust things to get the colors right. And then of course, I'm probably going to add another adjustment brush onto her hair because it's looking very, very black. And while it's dark, I don't want it completely blown out and losing all the detail. Now this might be an example of a photo that I actually might just take into black and white and see how it feels in black and white, because sometimes it's not worth the energy, right? Like, is this one of those photos that having it in color is going to make the biggest difference in the world? Probably not. So I might mark this as a red, and then later on I'll go and add some black and white preset to it. But for now, I'm just going to stick with black and white and move on with my day. Okay, so this one's pretty good. Let's take our exposure up a little bit. And then the one other thing I'm going to do is actually crop this photo in. Why? Because we've got a whole lot of ceiling up here that isn't adding much to the photo. So it's just easier for me, and probably going to be much better in terms of telling a story, to crop into this photo. So here's the original, and here's after. So to me, it just makes more sense to zoom in on the action. All right, now we got our groom. This looks pretty good. And if you're worried about low light conditions, like why isn't he denoising, or why isn't he worrying about this? I'm going to add denoise at the end of the process to my finished images. I'm not going to worry about it now because my computer's a little old. I'm also recording a screen recording, and if I were to try and edit denoised photos, it actually does slow Lightroom down quite a bit. All right, this one might also look nice in black and white, especially when I pair it with that other one of the bride. So let's roll with that for now. Mark it as red, and I'll come back and add a black and white later. This is actually really nice. I just want to increase the exposure just slightly and maybe add an adjustment brush on them just to make them a little bit brighter because I really want to see the face. Now, as I'm adding adjustment brushes, normally I tend to increase the highlights and the whites more than I'll try and raise the exposure. Because if I raise the exposure, it raises everything. And the shadows were meant to be dark, right? I just want the parts that were already brighter to be a little bit brighter so I can see a little bit more of the skin on her face, and I can make maybe the bride a little bit brighter too. Just like that. Okay, that feels pretty good. And then I'll just center the crop just a little bit. Next. Okay, this looks good, except for the saturation is just pretty high. So let's take the vibrance up, put the saturation down, somewhere around there, feels nice. And then I want to take the contrast down on this photo. I'm kind of trying to think about how this blends with the rest of the images. And to me, this one just has a lot more saturation than our last photo. So I want them to match, so I'm going to take this one and just darken it maybe slightly. Somewhere around there, feels pretty nice. Add a adjustment brush on our little bridesmaid here, and then on the bride's face there. And I might actually take the clarity down and the texture down just a bit, and that's going to smooth out the skin slightly. I don't normally do a lot of skin smoothing, like going in on every single image and doing this, because it's just not worth it. But when the bride is sideways to a window, you're really going to pick up a lot more of the imperfections in the skin, even if she has great skin to begin with, like this bride. So doing that takes an extra second. I could also go in here and maybe whiten her teeth just a little bit. But the key is working quickly. So easiest way to whiten teeth, just take the temperature down a little bit, and then add a little bit of magenta and saturation down just a bit. Generally, I find that's fast. Okay, this would look really good in black and white. I don't mind it in color, but I think I'm actually going to put it in black and white. I think that looks really nice. Alrighty, that actually looks pretty good. Maybe just a quick crop. Okay, this looks really nice. Maybe exposure down slightly. And let's crop in on the action just a bit. Get rid of this plug that's in the corner. And of course, you can be as fussy as you want. Some people would go in and they'd remove the cup from this coffee cup stand. We might as well. Let's remove these objects. But every time you do that, remember, you're waiting for that remove area using AI to do its thing and load. So that's going to take an extra 5 or 10 seconds per photo. So you've now doubled your editing time if you do that on every single photo. One thing I might get that is sort of unfortunate is there's some kind of a news headline with like a burning building in the background here. So being aware of that, 2 tips for you. Tip number 1 is, in general, when you're there is the best time to fix your photos, not when you're editing. So if you can, whenever possible, you want to do things like just turn off the TV. That is the best case scenario. Second thing is just be aware of the background in your photos, because it's more about removing distractions than it is about actually adding anything, okay? Same thing, we might just since we're here, we'll remove these slippers. But you're going to see, because I did that, and I've been talking, I've now probably taken 20 seconds on this one photo, which isn't necessarily even that important of a photo. Like, it's a nice moment, but it's not the kind of photo that I should be taking my really valuable editing time and putting it there. Okay, this one, I don't know what the heck happened, why it's so contrasty. I'm kind of confused. But we'll take our exposure down, take our contrast way down. Okay. Somewhere around there, and then maybe just reduce the saturation a little bit. Just try and level out that skin tone. Okay, that feels pretty good. Next. Okay, this one, we've got definitely a lot of fringing going on with the lens, so I am going to have to go down to lens corrections. And let's go manual, defringe, grab this bad boy, and see what it'll do for us. Not a whole lot. So in this case, probably the easiest switch is just go to color mixer and then desaturate the blues, because they're not really that important to this image. In this case, it actually made it look really, really weird. So here's my plan. I'm going to go to black and white. Not because I'm lazy and because I can't fix it, but because at the end of the day, this photo looks really great in black and white also. And so if it's not going to really affect how the client receives the image and it still looks awesome, why not save the time, right? It's a workflow decision. So let's take saturation down on this guy a little bit, contrast down a little bit. And you know what? Really quick, I'm actually adjusting the contrast on these photos a lot. I'm going to open up the Tourbox menu here, and I'm going to assign one of these dials to contrast. So let's actually take this one. If I hit this button here, and this button here, I can adjust this. So instead of adjusting vibrance, I'm actually going to change it to contrast. So let's go in here to the basic. Let's remove the vibrance setting, and let's set it to adjust the contrast. Okay, perfect. Let's head back into Lightroom. And now it's going to be really easy for me just to dial in my contrast as well as dial in my exposure. Maybe add a little bit more saturation to this photo. Okay. Kind of like that. Okay, and here's before, here's after. I'm pretty happy there. Looks okay. Next photo. Okay, and apparently I've got a duplicate of this one for some reason, so let's just remove that. This guy is looking pretty contrasty also, so I'll dial it back, make it a little bit more magenta, a little bit warmer, and a little bit brighter. Okay. Now, in this case, I actually like the edit I've done here. This one is very similar. I could just hit previous, and it will sync the settings from the last photo automatically, save me some time. This one's looking pretty green, so let's adjust to make it a little bit more magenta, and then let's add a little bit more contrast and drop the exposure maybe slightly around there. Now, the blues are very blue in this particular photo, so we're going to go down to the color mixer. Let's just take our blues down a little bit. Somewhere around there feels pretty good. And I'm actually going to add a little contrast back. Okay. Okay, this is looking real contrasty. And at this point, I'm starting to notice that all the photos taken of this scene tend to be really contrasty. So I might as well save myself some time and effort and actually go in here and just select all of the ones from this scene. So I'm going to hold Command on my keyboard, and I'm just going to scroll through, and all of the ones with the ladies here in the hotel room, we can select, okay? Now from there, I'm going to hit Develop. I'm going to adjust my contrast the way that I want it, maybe add some exposure here, just get my base settings where I like them. Okay, and then I can just hit sync and sync everything over on all of those photos and kind of edit as a batch rather than trying to edit every photo individually, okay? So I'm going to merge those adjustment brushes and let's keep going. Just make sure that they all got edited in a way that we like. Now, another way that you could do this is you could go to your library view, go up where it says metadata, and you can actually sort it by creator. So you can select creator up here, and then you can see I've got myself and then my second shooter, Shay. And so I can sort those photos really quickly and say, okay, I just want to edit Shay's photos because she was doing the bride prep. So let's edit all the bride prep at once, then edit all the groom prep. And oftentimes that's going to give you a much better result because you're consistently just going through the same scene and it's really easy to edit compared to bouncing back and forth like I have been. So do as I say, not as I do. All right, this one's pretty good, but obviously we've got a ton of haze coming in from this backlight. So I could try adding some dehaze. You're going to see it's pretty nasty. I could have told you that looking at it, it's not going to happen. So what I'm going to do is just adjust my white balance, my tint, kind of where I want them approximately, and then we're going to switch this one to black and white for sure. because it's going to look nice and vintage in black and white. I just don't think it's going to look really, really nice in color no matter what we do. So always get it in camera, take the extra second, move to the side, be aware of this stuff because it's so much easier just to move 3 feet in the moment than it is to try and fix something later on, as you're going to see when I get to the family photos, because I've got some trouble areas there that I definitely wasn't paying close enough attention. Okay, this one I'm actually going to also do black and white. I think that looks really nice. I am going to take a quick second and adjust the, remove this object, that is, as well as the Z from this window. And again, that's a tool to use pretty sparingly because it takes a long time. And if you do this on every photo, man, you're going to be wasting all day long. Something like that. Maybe pull our highlights down just a bit. Another thing I might do is go into the tone curve and take my highlights down slightly and just roll off the whites. I'd rather it be more creamy in the background than like this bright kind of blown out white. Good. That's better. Okay, white balance up. Exposure up a little bit. Contrast down. That looks nice. Just turn the contrast down a bit and warm it up slightly. Okay, I'm going to add an adjustment brush just because this part of the frame has got some dehaze going on, so I'll add a little bit of dehaze-ness back in there and a little bit of clarity back. And you can even just drop the shadows slightly and raise the highlights. Okay, drop our exposure, drop our contrast way the heck down, increase our temperature. There we go, really nice skin tones there. That feels great. And then because we've got such nice dark hair, I am going to go in here and just take the contrast down a little bit more, shadows up ever so slightly. Okay. And so that's why when I use a brush, generally, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make those edits subtle enough that I don't have to be super picky about getting the mask exactly right. Because if I don't get it right, let's say that I'm adjusting like this and we missed her dress, well, it's okay if I just do something that is subtle because you're not going to notice that that one dress was missed and I don't have to take that extra second to go and fix it. Whereas if I did something that was dramatic, like I really pushed everybody else bright in this photo and the dress wasn't affected, well, then life is not going to be easy for me. It's going to be obvious I made that edit. So this one I'm going to crop. And this one might be nice in black and white just because we've already done one in color. Perhaps. I kind of like it. Kind of like it in color. But since we have a duplicate now, this one I can go black and white. Okay, now the reaction. Again, I'm going to crop in every time. I want to keep a little bit of the environment in the room in the shot, but mostly I want to be able to see those expressions, right? Now, we've got a weird color cast happening. Skin looks good here, but it's very bluish over on this side. So I'm going to grab these couple of characters and just add a little bit of warmth with an adjustment brush, a little bit of contrast, and then drop our exposure. And then I'm going to have to try and balance it out by adding a brush over here, lowering the contrast and raising the exposure slightly. Before, after. All right, so we've hit the father-daughter first look. So I'm going to take a second here since we're in a new scene and just adjust our image. Get it nice and dialed in because we're going to be able to hopefully apply this across multiple photos from this scene. So when you can, you want to work in batches. It's going to speed things up for you. So let's adjust our saturation, maybe a little bit more pop. Somewhere around there feels actually pretty darn close. Now let's go to our grid view, hit G on our keyboard, and we're going to select all the photos from this scene, go back to develop, and just click sync, and sync all those straight across. And now we can go through and adjust these photos individually. So that one actually looks pretty good, maybe a little bit less saturation and a little bit less contrast. This one looks pretty freaking good to me. Okay, that one for some reason is quite cool. So we'll warm it up. And a little less saturation, just a bit. Same thing. And you can see that when your photo is actually pretty close, like you're editing in batches like this, it doesn't have to take super long to edit each individual photo, unless you're talking like me and then you get confused about which button you're pressing. Holy man, I'm getting lost here. Okay, there we go, something like that. Feels a little bit better. Okay, next. Okay. Where were we around here? Okay. Make use of our previous button. And I could crop it to be a little bit more straight, but in this case, I actually think I'm just going to crop in slightly so they're centered and actually leave it off kilter. Because to me, you feel more of the action and more of the like we're moving in this shot than if I were to make it perfectly straight up and down. We actually kind of add a little bit of like energy to the shot by doing it that way. Okay, keep going. You might recognize this one from a hot second ago. Okay. Maybe a little more contrast, just slightly more exposure. Okay. Now we're at the actual first look. Now at this point, I better switch over to my other camera because I need to finish off with the groom prep and take it to the same point. So we left off right around here. Okay, something like that. And this is the point in the process where I start to run out of things to say. Oh, whatever I just did, I don't want that. Okay, let's undo this, fix our temperature. Maybe a little more contrast and drop the highlights in the background. Okay, now in this case, I'm going to take my tone curve, take the whites, and just turn it down. And you can see how the sky goes from being this like super harsh brightness to just being a little bit more mellow, depending on how far I pull that back. So I might actually do that for a few of these photos, because I think now we've got a set of the groom and all of his friends. So I'm going to get this one exactly where I like it. Let's zoom back out. Maybe pull our blues down just a little bit. That'll clean up our photo just slightly. Maybe add a little bit of extra green and yellow. Try that out just to balance it. Okay, that looks not too shabby. I'm pretty happy with that there. Now, I'm going to grab all of the photos with this almost exact lighting and scene. And I'm just going to sync those straight across. Work smarter, not harder, when you can. All right, that one's pretty good, but our groom is just a little bit too warm, so I can actually select him like that. And honestly, having a Tourbox, you don't necessarily need it at all. I've done lots of editing without having one of these devices, but that one button alone, being able to quickly go to select object, and then I can just paint on exactly what I want to select. Doing that, instead of having to go to the trouble of going create new mask, select object, and then paint it on, it doesn't sound like much, but it really does add up after you've done a bunch of these photos. Okay, good. So, I'm a fan. Okay, so we've got a bit of an issue here. What I'm going to try doing is I'm going to check none. I'm going to select this object subject mask, and I'm going to attempt just pasting it and see if Lightroom is smart enough, which it appears to be, to continue finding our subject. Okay, good. Pretty good. Oh, don't know what happened there.
And this is the boring part of editing photos. Because you're not really doing anything super exceptional or interesting. I'm not editing photos that you really love to watch. It's just editing all the moments from the day, right? That the couple is going to love, but aren't necessarily the ones I would post on the blog. Okay, so you can see the color cast. So our subjects are really warm while the background is just too blue, which is why it's so handy having that object mask that I'm copy pasting. And that just evens things out, so then I can warm everything up and it just feels a lot better. So once again, here's before, here's after. I've just mellowed it out overall. Okay, now this one I'm actually going to go ahead and make a new object mask, just like that. Now the first thing I want to do is just select the background, and we're going to take the contrast down and the highlights down. We're going to try and get as much dynamic range back as we can, and also just take our white point down so it's a little bit less blown outy, for lack of a better word. And then because all of our crew in the front here is really warm, we're going to warm up the background, with the exception of this spot on the floor here that doesn't need any warming, until everything is kind of even. And at this point, now I can cool everything down in the shot. And it feels a lot better already. So here's before and here's after. Of course, I do need to adjust this mask just a little bit because I've made this pillar up here really, really yellow. So I could actually go subtract, select object, and then paint on this pillar. And if you ever want to see your mask more clearly, just hit the O key and you can see exactly what you're masking. Clearly, I still need to get rid of the mask that's on here, on this light thingy. Okay. So before and after, good. And then because I always overdo it, my advice to you is whenever you do an edit you're not sure about, just dial it back by like 50% and then you'll be safe. So you can see here's before and after of what I'm doing. So I'll just dial it back to around there. Okay. Looks pretty good. And then I can hopefully copy paste this mask over onto our next image. Maybe. Yeah, looks pretty good. Cool it down. And of course, we've got a couple characters over here that are looking really blue because they're closer to the outside. So we'll try and warm that up just a bit, add a bit of contrast in there. Now, I could go black and white. That would fix this. There's not really a way to recover when you have that kind of flare going on in front of somebody. So I'm probably going to set this one to black and white. But you know what? I actually kind of like it in color too. So we're going to make the best of it. Put one last mask on here and add just a bit of temperature to balance it out. And call it a day. Again, in my second pass, I might tweak this if it's standing out too much. Right now, I'm focused on speed. And sometimes what happens is you might be watching me and it's like, why didn't he see this thing? And the truth is I just didn't see it. And so I'm focusing on a lot of different things, knowing that later on, I'm going to catch the things that I didn't catch on the first try. That's why I would never actually publish a wedding after just one go, because I know there's going to be things that I miss. Your eyes get used to looking at a screen, they start noticing certain details and stop noticing other ones, and so... Okay, so there's a lot of color cast going on skin. You can see where it's orange and where it's blue. So I'm going to try and grab all the orange spots and just take the temperature down to even it out a bit. So here's before and here's after. Maybe pump our contrast a bit, exposure up a little bit, and saturation up just a bit. Sure. That's a cute one. I love this guy. He's got a good attitude. I want to be like him when I grow up. Okay, so we've got the same thing going on here, right? Where our subject, very, very warm compared to the background. So we're just going to select. Okay. Now we can warm everything up. Okay, this one's cute, but we got some major flare, so rather than fight it, I'm just going to lean into it, go black and white. Nice. Okay, we're going to select our subject here. Brighten him up a little bit. And then another thing I'm going to do is just use that Brooding Dehaze Darken mask, just like this. Hello. Invert it and dial it back. So here's before and after. So it's just kind of blurring out the background just a bit. If you wanted to, it's actually driving me a little nuts, so I'll fix it. The blue is just pretty saturated, so there you go. That's better. Okay, this one's just looking real cold and real bright. Somewhere around there feels pretty nice. Pump those highlights a bit. Feels good. Cute. So our groom's just a little bit darker, so I'm going to brighten him slightly. And then I'm going to add a graduated filter on this side. Just trying to make the exposure even across the entire image. Okay, white balance is real weird on this photo, probably because it's very underexposed. And we could actually pump the highlights, add some contrast back to the photo. And if I wanted, I could go in here to the lens corrections because we have quite a bit of vignetting going on, and I could try and fix that. However, I don't know, I kind of am digging the sort of vintagey vibe, so I'm going to leave it a little bit like that. And that's the thing, it's a bit of an art form in deciding whether you need to correct something or whether having it intentionally be a little bit stylistic, which is going to work for you and which makes more sense. But in this case, I definitely know that I want this to be more of a prominent feature in the photo, which means I want to make it brighter. Add a little bit of dehaze, darken everything else down. And even then, not really happy with this. I think partially because the light itself is just really, really harsh. So what I could try doing, go back to my moody dehaze. I might wind up going with a different photo of that same plant later on. Okay. So you can see here, I was actually using my hand to shade the camera because I was getting quite a bit of lens flare. So that's why that's in the top upper corner. And we're going to move on. Looks pretty good. Love those greens. Colors look great. It's always nice when you don't have to touch something. And I think that's something that I'm still working on to this day. But not every photo needs to be adjusted, right? Like sometimes it's just good as is. And learning that you don't need to apply every adjustment to every single photo in order for it to look good. If it looks good, it's okay. You don't get bonus points for working harder than you need to. So when you do have harsh highlights in the back, I like just rolling off the whites. It just makes it a little bit more kind of creamy and less distracting than those blown out highlights. So in this case, we have a nice profile shot of the groom. I'm going to take the extra second to adjust the white balance on him so he's slightly warmer. Take the contrast down and brighten him up slightly. And then I'm even going to add a little bit of clarity and a little bit of dehaze. Not because he needs it, but because then what I can do is go into my main image, go to my detail or to my basic, take my clarity down and my dehaze down overall, and darken the whole image. And then I just wind up getting a little bit more subject separation, right? Let's go previous. And because this is the groom, he's one of the stars of the show, I'm going to take that extra second. His teeth could use a little bit of a whiten. For whatever reason, they're just not at their best in this angle. So again, easiest way, adjust the temperature, adjust the saturation. If you want to, just take the contrast down, highlights up. There we go. Before, after. So in this detail shot, I'll just add a radial filter, darken everything down, and pull the contrast way down, even the saturation, because we have some weird color cast going on in this photo overall. I could try taking it the other way and making everything brighter too, just see which one actually works better. But it looks like I'm going to have to adjust this with some graduated filters because it's pretty extreme. Really yellow in the bottom, really blue at the top. That's better. Before, after. Maybe still slightly too warm, but... All right, we've made it to the first look, people. We have made it. So I'll get this dialed in the way I like it. That actually looks freaking good. Maybe dial our highlights back just a bit. Oh yeah, baby. Oh yeah. Okay, somewhere around there. Looks good. Okay, use my object removal here. Get rid of the second photographer. And now our couple's just a little bit dark. I want them to stand out slightly more. And since this is one of those main moments from the day, we'll just go with an object selector. Like so. Hit the O key, make sure it actually worked. Yep, pretty good. Nice. In this case, I'm not actually going to worry too much about getting that perfect mask. Maybe I will. Specifically on our bride because she's looking pretty dark. Okay, and in this case, just the way the light is catching her skin. Oh, hello. Be worth taking an extra second here just to smooth out those lines just a bit. And again, hold Alt and you can toggle to your eraser. Make sure you're not getting rid of any detail that you actually want to have, like on her hair and her eyes. Good. Okay, we got a bit of a color cast on the side of our groom's face here. You can just see there's some green going on. probably being reflected off of the trees. So I'm going to grab those areas, add a little bit of magenta, drop the saturation just a bit, drop the contrast, and maybe even drop the shadows slightly. Okay. Now if you want to, you could go in and you could actually go ahead and add some contrast and some highlights to the eyes, make them pop just a bit, but don't go too far because then they will look really weird. Just be warned. Okay. Here's our before, after. Very cute. And again, we got a bit of color cast on the arm. It's looking slightly green. So I'm going to take that, add a little magenta, and also drop the saturation and the temperature. That'll cool down the skin. I'm actually going to apply it to all their skin. And maybe drop my contrast overall just a bit. My exposure. Cool. Okay, now the dress is being a little blown out, so we'll just make a quick mask. And again, I'm looking for color cast, so his shirt should be white, it shouldn't be blue. So I'll just warm that up slightly, drop the temperature just a bit. I'm not worried about perfection because at the end of the day, it's okay for there to be some color cast because in real life that would have happened also. It's just that I want to make sure I'm not making it exaggerated or distracting, that it's not taking away from the image, right? So you can see how purple the inside of his shirt has become. And that's no good. So we'll just go ahead and warm it up, just like that. Same with his teeth. For whatever reason, cameras don't always capture color the same way our eyes see it. Easy. And then her hair is caught in shadow. So we'll brighten that up just a little bit. And pretty much rinse and repeat, but with all new masks this time because they move positions. Okay. So I'm going to just brighten until they both look like the exposure is about right. And then I'm going to deal with the consequences, which is tiling the whites back on the dress, grabbing all the areas that are just way too blue. And I could fix this also by going into my HSL and pulling the blue channels down. But the problem with that is I actually want some blue in the photo because the sky is blue. There's blue moving around in the image. So in this case, it's actually easier just to do this. It doesn't take too long. And then the teeth. Good, good. Maybe a radial filter right up here. Now you want to be careful you don't take it too far. Like I might have taken it too far. And so it's now starting to look a little bit edited. So I'm not going to take it any further. I'll just deal with it on the second pass. Now this one, we've got all sorts of weird blotchy skin coloration issues. Like that's super weird. Let's just turn off and on my mixer and make sure it's not that. Nope. And I know for a fact that in person, he does not have weird color on his skin. So we are just going to take this photo, this particular one, and put it into black and white. And even then you can see there's something weird going on the skin. So this one to me isn't a deal breaker. I have lots of photos of his reaction, so I'm actually going to remove it from the gallery. Again, work smarter, not harder. If it's not going to really make a big difference to the client, then I'm not going to worry about spending a bunch of time on something that in the end I could be spending on a more impactful part of the day. That's beautiful. Now with this one, I might actually select them, make an object selection mask, and invert it to get the background. I'm going to take the contrast down, the exposure down a little bit, clarity down, dehaze down. I basically just want to have them separated from the background just a little bit more because I think this is such a beautiful moment. Good. And you know what? I'm even going to adjust the white balance just a bit because the background looks slightly cooler. Mhm. It's always wild to me how different the same photo, same spot, will look with a different lens on the exact same camera, but just a different camera body. So these were both taken on A7 IVs, two different lenses, two completely different color profiles, one insanely contrasty, the other very, very much not the case. So it might take a little back and forth to actually figure out how to match these. Around there looks pretty close. Go back and forth, compare them. Not too shabby. I think part of the reason is one of these cameras, the lens actually had a circular polarizer on it. The other it did not. And so that's why you have more vibrant colors and contrast on one of the lenses. Because it is quite incredible, the difference here. One thing I'm actually frequently surprised by is my head is so used to thinking, oh, don't go too much contrast, because when I was beginning to edit, that was my default. I would want everything super full of contrast, super full of saturation, and as a result, my edits, like a lot of new photographers, just looked way too much. The phrase that I've heard used is cooking in the kitchen. It looks like you've been doing a lot of editing, because you have. And so the photo just doesn't look natural anymore, and you lose the ability to see that the more you tweak and mess with it. But as I grow and I see more stuff and I study film photography, there's actually a ton of contrast in film. Like, there is blown out areas and really dark shadows. It's just knowing when and how much that you have to develop that taste. And I am still miles away from actually having that nailed, but that's an ongoing process that even now I'm not perfect. I know, hard to believe a guy like me isn't perfect. What can you do? Okay. Come on. There we go. Select our groom because he's looking pretty blue. But yeah, how weird is it that everything else looks blue compared to the groom? Cameras don't see things the same way our eyes see them. Then his teeth. In person, not yellow. In camera, not doing the same. Okay, now, this is an example of taking teeth whitening too far. That's before, that's after. So we're just going to dial it back with that amount slider. And his eyes actually look pretty dark. So we're going to accentuate those catch lights and brighten them up a bit too. Now the problem is my mask wasn't accurate, so just be careful. Always go subtle, and then that way you don't have to be too super accurate. It saves you some time and energy. Now this is a part of the day where you're like, what? Why are they exchanging rings? And the reason is simple, folks. Little hot tip for you, if you can actually get your macro shots of rings on fingers before the ceremony starts, and then that way during the ceremony you don't have to worry about getting the ring shot because you already got it. Sometimes this works, other times obviously this doesn't work because you're not in the right location or the light changes. But it's just a little thing you can try that may save you some trouble. All right, graduated filter because it's way darker up here. And way warmer. Cool. And now we will even out the white balance. Somewhere around there. Maybe drop the saturation slightly. Raise the contrast. And I know for a fact I'm going to need to tweak that one later because I'm not really happy with it, but my eyes just aren't really cluing into what needs to happen right now. So rather than get stuck on it, I'm moving on, and I'll come back to it on a second pass. Okay, this is just a little cold. Now our couple might not even be in focus. In fact, not too bad. But we are going to want to make sure we make an object mask, and we select both of them. Not the best mask, not the worst. But essentially, I just want to try and make them bright. And then I'll duplicate this mask and invert it. That's the background. Zoom back out. Try darkening the background down and dropping the contrast a bit. This is a bit of a tricky photo because of the time of day. I'm not happy there. Don't like it. Honestly, they're not super in focus and the expression isn't great, so I'm actually going to ditch this one. I know that I have more coming up. This one by itself is even better, so we'll try this one instead. Just grab our groom here, try and pull those highlights back because he was getting beat by the sun. Okay, somewhere around there feels pretty good. Very nice. Okay. How beautiful are those colors? Now, obviously the light outside, super harsh, super bright. That's why I position my subjects when I can with the sun behind them, and you wind up getting at least some nice flat light on them. So they're getting hit by the sun, but at the same time, the light on their faces is not those deep, dark raccoon eyes or super harsh highlights. This is what I prefer when I have the option, and then a nice dark background in behind them. You're going to get way better results this way. Okay, let's adjust our tint just a little bit because we're looking pretty green. Somewhere around there looks nice. Okay, this one I grabbed because I thought it was kind of a cool black and white. And anytime you have a couple who has different skin tones, you're going to be doing a lot of brushing just to match them, because the way that light interacts with one skin color doesn't necessarily translate to the same on the other skin color. So you might find, oh, your settings look great on one person, but on the other person they need adjusting. That's just normal. No real way around that. And in this case, they're blurry in the background, but I just want to accentuate that. So we're going to grab a nice little radial filter and just make it even more hazy in the background. This is nice as black and white. Thinking. Okay. Now, if you're wondering if we skipped to the end of the ceremony, no, we did not. For whatever reason, we had some time and the family was waiting around, so we actually did kind of a tunnel exit. In the same way that we shot the rings ahead of time, we shot the exit ahead of time just in case, because you don't always know if you're going to get great exit photos. So we figured, we have the time. We'll just get the family and the most important people all to line up, and we'll get the couple to go through and celebrate like they just got married. In the end, they kind of wound up with some really beautiful shots. So. Very nice. Subject at the front here is just a little bit, well, a lot of it actually, out of focus. So we're going to try and add a little bit more detail back to her. And in the end, I don't know. I probably am not going to give them this photo. If I do, I'll give it to them in black and white. I feel like with black and white, you have a little bit more forgiveness. If something isn't in focus, it's kind of like part of the feel and the aesthetic. Mm-hmm. So in case you didn't know this trick already, if you hit the apostrophe/quotation mark key on your keyboard, you can invert any mask. So in this case, I made a quick mask on top of the sign, hit apostrophe, and I was able to mask out the background. But as you can see, if you get a good, decent lighting, composition, all those things in camera, and you get a decent preset look set that everything looks pretty close by the time you actually start editing, the actual editing process doesn't have to take that long. Now, of course, I'm taking a lot longer because I'm trying to explain things as I'm going, and I have ADD, so it's hard for me to pay attention to two things at once, but I'm doing my best. And hopefully it's been helpful. I'm curious, if you do have questions, comments, ways that you would do it differently, I'd love to hear it. Let's have a conversation, leave it in the comments. And again, if you have a question, I'm happy to answer anything that I haven't covered, or if I've gone too deep or not deep enough on something. If I've gone too deep and you want me to unexplain something, please leave it in the comments below. Man. It's quite funny because I feel like I'm normally reasonably articulate, but then when I turn on the camera, it's like all that goes out the window. Very nice. Good vibrant colors. And so your style might be more bright and airy, and if so, more power to you. The same workflow kind of applies no matter what presets you're using, as long as you get that base look down. And in general, the better your light is, the better it is in camera, the easier it's going to be to edit. And that's the irony. This wedding, in general, because it was later in the day, as you can see, it's almost around sunset. And so because of that, the light is just much more soft for the most part. People are in shade and we're shooting intentionally with the sun behind people, which just winds up meaning that you have way, way less editing to do than if you're in kind of the reverse situation where it's really harsh light, noonday sun, then you're doing a lot more masking, especially if the groom is half in the sun, half in the shade, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I did say in the culling process, normally I would try not to have too many repeats. There are some exceptions to that, which would be the bride entrance, the wedding party exit, the kiss, stuff like that, where you want to give them a few options and they're going to want to have those. Okay, so in this case, I just added a little radial filter because I thought, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if the sun was kind of cascading out from the side? So you can see, here's all I did. I just took the temperature all the way up. And what a difference that makes to the color of the scene and just how it feels. Now, if you want to go even further, you could drop the contrast down, drop your dehaze down a little bit and your clarity, and that'll even give you the impression of more of a sun flare happening in that photo. So then you really get those sunset vibes. Hot tip, if you hold Alt while you crop, it'll crop equally in towards the center of the frame, which can be helpful because most of the time that's the exact direction that you are going to want to crop. And I'm just doing really basic adjustments here, making them a little bit brighter, cropping into the center, warming up the white balance, making sure the horizons are straight and that my lines vertically on this building are straight. Little radial filter, contrast down, whites up, and warm them up a little bit. So it just helps guide your eye so you know where to look. Now in this case, there is a wheelchair off to the side here. I don't know how much I need to worry about removing it because obviously it was a real guest who was there. But in this case, since I notice it, I'll just see if I can. Oh, since I'm noticing it for this one photo, I'll just see if Lightroom can remove it. And then there's also a second photographer. Sneaking around. Close enough. So you can see this is kind of like a mobile spotlight. You can put it wherever you want. If you want to, just subtract it from any areas that you don't want it to affect. Easy. So I could crop way in on the ring bearer, and that would work. But I actually sort of like the fact that when you see him walking up next to a full-sized human, it just seems you have the sense of scale. So I'm intentionally not going to crop in that spot. Okay. So in this case, we'll do our sun flare trick. Texture, clarity, dehaze down. Temperature way up, and if you want to, you can even add a little bit of yellow color. And how far you go with that is totally up to you. But then what I like to do is just subtract with a brush, and then we're just going to brush it off of maybe our main characters a little bit. Turn the flow down just a little. Okay. So you can see that's pretty intense. So I'm going to take the whole thing, dial it back to maybe 30% of that, lower our exposure, and make sure our couple is still nice and bright. Before, after. Invert this mask, so I just select the background and darken it down. Right, so I'm not making any major changes. And then I'm going to subtract with a brush so that I don't get rid of this beautiful bouquet. That's want to keep that bright. In fact, I actually am noticing that that is a little bit too warm, so we'll adjust that too. Okay. This is kind of a repeat of the last photo, but for now it can stay. All right, spot removal tool. Just get rid of these. And because this one's a close-up, I'm going to do a couple of things. First is brush on her eyes and her eyebrows and add just a little bit more clarity. Love it. Maybe a little on her lips also. And the second is going to be exactly opposite that. I'm just going to make sure that her skin is looking as good as it practically can. Perfect. Before, after. Bit of a color cast on the skin here, just slightly green. Then over on the shirt, it's just a little blue. Beautiful moment. Not loving the color, so I could mess around, but I think this is going to look really nice in black and white, so I'm going to keep it in black and white. Okay, so these photos are very similar, but the second one is much better, so I'm actually going to just go with this one. The best feeling in the world for me, maybe not in the whole world, a great feeling, is when I actually get to delete a photo. Not because it's less work, although that's obviously nice, but mostly because it means that I'm paring down the gallery, which means that the client is going to get a more kind of concentrated experience. Because the reality is that you're only as good as kind of your worst photo. Ironically enough, if you show a client 10 photos and there's 9 great photos and one that is just awful, that they absolutely hate the way they look, you know how they're going to feel about their photos? Not pumped, even if the other 9 are amazing. And so I would encourage you, less is often much more. If you can give them fewer amazing photos, as opposed to a ton of mediocre photos with the amazing photos thrown in, you're going to wind up having your clients be happier. Nice. Okay, so this part of them, heavy shadow. So I'm going to add a radial filter on this side and just brighten things up and reduce the contrast a lot. Then on this side, same exact opposite. I'm going to lower the exposure down. And hopefully that's going to even things out a little bit. All the same, I think this is going to be prettier in black and white. Very nice. So rather than try and get all of this done in one mask, I'm actually adding a few, right? A few different radial filters to brighten parts of the image selectively, adjusting my white balance selectively, and just working quickly with like more broad strokes rather than trying to do like super pointed edits. It just sort of lets me work faster and get closer without having to be super accurate. So here's before and here's after. So I've just shifted where you look to the brightest part of the image. I've adjusted the white balance obviously quite a bit. And on my second pass, I might figure out, oh shoot, I way overdid it. I frequently do. Okay, get this one dialed in because I know we're in a sequence here of photos. Okay, try that. Switch to my grid view here and just select all of these. Sync things over. So rather than brighten the whole image, I'm actually going to try just brightening up their skin just a little bit by lowering the contrast right there like that. Then I'm going to adjust some brightness up. That'll give me more pop overall because the rest of the image remains a little bit more contrasty, a little more saturated. And then on a couple spots here, just take the saturation down a little bit. Voila. Okay, that's the ceremony, folks. Now on to the fun stuff. So in general, if the group is more wide than they are tall, take it in landscape. If they're just a shorter, like 2 or 3 people, then you take it in portrait. But with this one, it's kind of in this weird, like, awkward middle ground. How cool is this oyster boat? Sadly, I don't like oysters, so it was wasted on me. But I can appreciate a good oyster boat. Okay, so need to turn on generative AI here. Now I'm going to spend a little bit more time on these photos specifically because I know that the venue might reshare them. And so with that in mind, it's actually worth it for me to do things like remove all these cars, even though it means sitting around and waiting for a few more photos. And so if you're wondering what this shot was taken on, it was taken on a DJI Mini 4, I think. Yeah, it should say in here. Maybe it's the Mini 3. Basically, just a DJI Mini. If you ever do wind out going to Mexico and take a drone, don't be surprised when they actually charge you sales tax when you enter the country. I learned that on this wedding because I had to pay $200 when I crossed the border. This is one cool detail they had with loved ones who weren't around. They had them all hanging on the tree. So the kind of cool thing about this particular venue is it was actually at a mango farm, which I think is freaking cool as a person who has no mangoes up in Canada. The only problem being there were no fresh mangoes when we arrived, but there were lemon trees, which was cool. Okay, so in this case, I'm just taking the extra 2 seconds to go around and I'm actually brightening up each of the tables just slightly. And they're slightly blue when they're in the shadows, so I'm just going to warm up the temperature just a bit. Then turn down my flow and kind of get the whole patio part that's in the shade. Just a bit. Okay. And remove this waiter. If we really want to go crazy, we could actually just pull the blue out of this water a little bit by lowering the temperature, lowering the tint. And increasing that saturation. There we go. Before, after. And maybe see if it actually looks better rotated. Just out of curiosity. Yeah, it looks kind of cool. Nope. And then I'm going to go into my lens corrections, and I'm actually going to transform rather. Just get this pool perfectly square. Let's try that again. Guided. Let's go with the outside of this concrete patio. Cool. So again, don't need to do it on every shot, but on those couple of shots that are really going to set your work apart, maybe get reshared, sometimes it's worth the extra effort. Okay, this one, more of the same. Brighten her up. This one's actually pretty perfect as is actually, so might just leave it exactly like that. Key to a good drone photo, great light. If the light is good, life is easy. So that's why having a second photographer is very, very helpful for situations like that. And really it's just about adjusting the light so that your eye knows where to look, which is down in this important part of the photo, not off in the distance. So I'm going to add another radial filter up in the corner. We're actually going to take the exposure down a little bit, contrast down a little bit, and maybe even like there's a bit of a sun coming from that side, just like that. Before, after. That one's actually from the ceremony. I don't know why. For some reason, it's out of order. We'll fix that later. Love this shot. So one thing I am going to do is there's this building right here in the way. I'm actually going to take a little bit of creative liberty because it really doesn't change the story or the reality of the moment. And I'm just going to get rid of the way that building is peeking out there. Just because it's a little bit of a distraction, doesn't really add to the story of the day at all. And let's see if any of the other variations are better. There we go, that's better. Probably that one. Nice. Okay, darken that white down. I'm going to try and get a little bit more detail out of the tip of this mountain. They had a phone booth where you could leave a message for the bride and groom, like an audio guest book, which was kind of cool. Okay, colors in this one, not so good. I know I have lots of great photos of this particular guest. So when in doubt, cut it out. Nice. Okay, and then we have this really cool, amazing moon. I'll actually put that one as a black and white. So I want your attention drawn to them a little bit more, but I also don't want to be obvious that I've brightened them up. I want it to feel like the photo actually felt that way, which is why I'm going with a really broad radial filter, and then one a little bit closer. And then finally one that actually is just literally on them. So we went from here to here. Copy those over. So you can see I forgot to use my Tourbox just now to select the object. So much slower to go into those submenus. Totally doable if you have to, but okay. Select that moon, get as much detail out of it as I can. And so one thing that's kind of interesting is they had this amazing full moon. The venue is actually called Baja Luna, which I do not speak any Spanish, but I know that Luna is moon, and they have the venue kind of decorated with the phases of the moon, and so it's kind of amazing timing. Okay, so I'm going to try and add a little bit more of a mood to this. Okay. This is one of those few times that I think a 16mm actually looks kind of cool. When you use it stylistically to make something feel way bigger than it is. And also, this is the groom's two best men. They were having a moonlight serenade. So in general, this preset actually seems to be looking pretty darn good with the night scene. So I'm just going to keep on rolling with it. Obviously, this was super low light. Like you can see how bright the candles were and how most of the light is coming from the actual candles in this scene. That's where having a camera that does decent in low light actually is very important. There we go. Okay, so I got that kind of dialed. I am going to save those settings. Just so that I can quickly copy paste them when and where I need to. And of course, it's not going to work in this setting because these photos of the bride and groom entering, they were taken with flash. And there was literally nothing to bounce off of because it was outside, so it was all direct flash. Which isn't bad as long as you have, again, a second person that you can sort of set up your settings before people arrive. The worst is when you're by yourself, so even if you don't have somebody, you can always ask a DJ or ask the planner or grab a friendly looking guest. Trust me, you never want to go into flash without taking some test shots first. It is way easier to ruin a moment with flash than it is to save one. I'm super curious. If you're still tuning into this, you've been doing weddings for more than one wedding. Do you have any terrible flash stories? I would love to hear them because I know I have my fair share. Because it's easy on a tiny little screen to think, oh, this looks amazing, looks totally fine. And then you get home and you put those photos on a big screen and you see all the problems that you didn't see when you were there in the moment. And if only you'd noticed, everything could have been saved. All right. And because they are hit by the flash and none of the guests are, I am going to have to make sure I warm them up just to balance out the white balance. Do an adjustment brush here. Basically all of this dance floor doesn't need to be as bright as the rest of the photo. Because I want you looking at the parts of the photo that matter. Same thing. We can even use our previous button, get us pretty close, and just move that mask over. And dial it back so it's not too extreme. But this is one of those rare first dances where the lighting actually worked and it wasn't rubbish and it looks beautiful in the background. I don't know about you, but it's not super often for me that I wind up with first dance photos I actually like, because if you're not in a pretty place with pretty light, you can do what you want, but it's going to look more or less like it looked in real life. is my experience. Now, if you disagree and you have a secret trick for me, please, again, share. Because what I found is, yeah, you can use flash to kind of drown out the background, make the background black. That's an option. You can minimize some distractions. You can face in a different direction. Like, there are things you can do, but at the end of the day, if you're in a not so nice looking room and it's, say, a gym, there's not much you can do to change what a photo looked like to begin with. Unless you go into AI and you change everything. In which case, I don't know if the couple would like that anyways. Anyways, that's the first dance. We are cruising, people. We got some speeches. Now, generally, where I can, I like to set up the speeches in one location, have them speak from a podium. My not worst nightmare, but unpreferred method is when they pass the mic around and you're going all over the place. And the reason is pretty simple. When that happens, the light is changing every single photo. So you wind up just doing a whole lot more editing and work. And you wind up with less than ideal lighting most of the time. Because at least if I set up the speeches, I will do my best to work with the DJ, with the planner, and make suggestions about, hey, if we set it here, the photos are going to be better and your guests are going to see better. I do what I can to solve the problem before it actually happens. Now, in theory, let's try our settings from earlier. Nope, not going to work because this was being lit. I had a little pocket light, an aperture light that I've had in my bag for years that I absolutely love. And I'll use it for the reception or for a destination wedding where I really don't have room to take full lights with me. It's just a flash and this little light. And I literally will hold it and then I'm shooting with one hand, holding the light with the other. And it works in a pinch like this was. Never going to be completely ideal, but you always want to have options in your bag. There's nothing worse than getting to a wedding, realizing, oh shoot, it's too dark and there's nothing I can do. Or you're anticipating, I'm going to be able to use flash, but then the priest, for example, says absolutely no flash in the building. Then you're really in trouble. But if you have a video light, you have an option. So I'm not too worried about making these photos look like they weren't taken with flash. I'm going to kind of lean into that aesthetic. And luckily, for whatever reason, that's actually coming back now. I'm curious in the comments below if you're pro like 90s flash vibes. I guess it makes our job easier as photographers because it used to be that you wanted everything to look like it was all natural lighting. And now people are kind of leaning into the like, yeah, it was lit with flash. That's cool. It looks like a little compact camera kind of idea. What a cool spot though, hey? So here's the unedited photo, just so you can see, and here's with the preset. So it's not really doing much. It's brightening up the shadows. It's making the colors a little bit more richer. It's rolling off the highlights. It's rolling off the blacks just slightly. But if you get great color in camera, your colors are going to look much better when you edit, regardless of what preset you use. And I think that's something that people did not communicate to me when I was starting out. I literally thought like the reason my colors didn't look right is because I needed a new lens or a new camera, or I needed to find the perfect presets. And all those things can help. Like you stack them up and you get a 10% improvement here, there, the next thing, and it makes a difference. And at the same time, if it looks amazing to your eyes, it will look amazing to your camera. And if it looks rough to your eyes and the light is just inconsistent and all over the place, well, the same thing is going to happen when you edit it, regardless of what presets you use. Some are definitely better than others. Some will make your life way easier, but most of the look comes from the composition, the in-camera settings, the lens choice. I will say, because we're talking about low light specifically as we're going through this, one really important lesson that took me way too long to realize was that the ISO you shoot at doesn't just affect the amount of grain in the photo, it massively impacts how the colors look. So you see how red and kind of muddy everything is here? It's because the ISO on this camera is set to not 1250, but it's just massively, massively dark. And so your camera starts losing the color richness and contrast. So you always want to shoot at the lowest possible ISO, not just because you don't want grain, but because the color itself will start to break down and get really mushy and nasty. That's what's going on here more than anything, is that the color just is breaking down. Whereas this one was taken, let's take a look, 1600 ISO, but there's more natural light on them. And so you don't have that same issue here. I'm no pro. I've just realized that over time, the photos where I had the low ISO, the color is way, way better, and yeah, you're just better off. Better off. I'm kind of rambling. I say I'm no pro, but I do this professionally for a living, and I'm also giving you a tutorial on how to edit, so I take it back. I am pro. Kind of. Nice. Yeah, these are looking great. And again, I'm not interested in trying to make it look like it was daylight, because it wasn't. It's okay that it was this dark, because it was in real life. And that's going to look more natural to your eyes anyways, than if I were to try and edit it and make it unnaturally bright. And again, that was an issue in my earlier editing days, was I just tried to make things look like they didn't. And you're not quite sure why it doesn't feel right. Well, it's because to your eye, it would never look that way. Okay, I might take the saturation down on that a little bit. Mm-hmm. I keep having to look around a camera that I have here. If you're wondering why I keep doing that. We are closing in. So I don't know if you can tell, but things are quite a bit faster when I'm not also doing a tutorial and walking through exactly what I'm doing. Hopefully this is still making sense. It's pretty much the same process for all of them. I'm lowering the contrast, adjusting the white balance, kind of give or take here. Same thing with the saturation, slightly up, slightly down, just as the photo needs it, and then cropping in where necessary. And so again, in this particular photo, I'm going to remove the couple of people standing here. I'm actually going to get rid of the DJ booth stuff, and I'm going to get rid of the kind of shiny lights up here. Not because I want to trick anybody, but because those things all move in real life, and they don't really serve to, tell the story. They're just distractive elements in this particular composition. There we go, that's not bad. Nice, colors look amazing. I'm just going to do a little bit of blur back here, since we have some real people in the background. Good. And then we went out to this ceremony pavilion and we did some dancing photos with the drone, which was super cool. And I already know I'm definitely going to need to use some major denoise on this. Okay, this one I'm going to go ahead and just use the pavement as my reference lines. Cool. These drone photos are a little out of order. That one doesn't really do much, so I'm going to remove it. Now, this particular photo I might not give to every bride, but that's because it depends on the person. And so I know this bride was really having a lot of fun, and she'd like the silly ones, so I'm going to include it in there. Now this looks pretty good in color. Might actually be better in black and white because they were kind of going for like a gangster moment. And we'll give them this one in color. Kind of curious, do you give your client photos in black and white and color, or do you do just one or the other? In general, what I do is I will give them whichever one I think works best. And then if they come back and say, hey, I really want this in color, I'll say, yeah, okay. I did it this way because it works best in black and white, I felt, but you're welcome to have it, and then I'll send it through. That way, I've kind of covered my bases if it's one of those photos that is hard to edit, didn't really work out so well in color. They're not going to be surprised. Love this moment. Now, one thing I will say when it comes to getting good dance photos, one, you need to have a wedding where people are dancing and having a good time. Obviously, there's not much you can do if they don't dance. But second, you need to take like 50 photos for every one photo that works out. That would be my advice to you is if it's your first wedding, you haven't done this before, in order to get good dance photos, it just takes that many because most of them are going to be out of focus. People aren't looking the right way. One person looks good, the other doesn't look so good. But reception photos has always been the trickiest part for me because it's where you're dealing with the most mixed light, inconsistent light, white balance issues, and things just really can take a huge difference depending on whether or not you have your white balance. Like 100 Kelvin can make the biggest difference in how your photo looks, whether it looks good or whether it looks just weird. And so developing that ability to know what a photo should look like is kind of something that comes with practice more than anything. But you can definitely use the reference view inside of Lightroom. If I think it's Command R, or if you go to grid, you can hit this little XY. And what is it? Command C, Command R, come on. C, compare view. That'll allow you to actually have one photo as a reference of a reception that you like the edit of and just have that next to your edit the entire time, or have a secondary screen that you have a really nice reference photo on the entire time. That can be very helpful in making sure that your photos actually wind up with the look that you're going for. Otherwise, the more hours that you spend in front of a computer screen in a row, the more your eyes start to lie to you. So at this point, you might be watching this and be like, oh yeah, that looks really bad. Why doesn't he see that? It's because I've been sitting here for long enough that I probably need to give my eyes a break, which is why I never try and get it on the first pass. I say, okay, I'm going to just do my best here, not stress too much, and then on my second pass, I'm going to catch all the things after my eyes have had a rest, and I look at it for a second time. but we are closing in now. I don't know why, but for some reason I really like this photo. It just reminds me of like a vintage Polaroid. I have all these other great photos from the day, but this random guest, he's the one. He's the one keeper. Also, favorite part about this wedding? They had churros for dessert. How freaking cool is that? Answer, very freaking cool. Yeah, so much of the wedding day, or at least the photos from the reception, all depends on what the couple and the kind of vibe of the guests is. Because if they ain't dancing like this, what you gonna do? One thing that I do encourage couples to do, though, if I have the chance, is I will say to them, "Hey guys, when you finish on the dance floor, I'll go get them and say, hey, can you dance just one dance together, like just party before the groom goes and has his drink with the girls, with his guys." Because normally what happens is the dude is over it at that point, oftentimes, and he'll go and you literally won't see him again for the rest of the evening. And so if you don't get them to dance together a little bit, you don't have any photos of them partying. So we got just a handful more and we are donezo, Washington. And with that, my friends, we are done this wedding, at least the first pass. Now, let me walk you through the second pass. I'm not going to make you sit here and watch it, because that's probably going to take me another 45 minutes to an hour just to go through and make sure everything is absolutely perfect. But essentially what I do is on the second pass, I'm going to go through and I'm going to enter my library view. I'm going to hit the E key on my keyboard for loop view, and I'm just going to go through really quickly like this. And when an image stands out that doesn't really fit, so for example, this one maybe the temperature just isn't quite right, let's say. Well, then I can go into my develop module and I'm going to adjust very slightly and just make that tweak and go back by hitting E again to get into loop view. And the reason I'm doing it in loop view is because it's much faster, you can see, to load the images. So I can cycle through, and just when something actually pops out as like, oh, that needs a tweak, then I can tweak it. And I want to do it that way before looking at the images just in this nice basic grid view. So the second pass, I guess, or the third pass is going to be looking at the images in a grid so that I can actually see how everything plays together. So you can make your thumbnails nice and big, and then just go through, and anytime something stands out, like, oh, that doesn't really quite fit, that doesn't vibe, then you can go in and adjust it so that everything kind of flows consistently from image to image to image. And if I'm not going to notice it at this point, it's probably not super important for me to actually go through and fix. And that's one of those things, when you're starting out editing, it can be so tempting to fix every little thing in every single photo. And that is absolutely something you should do if it makes a difference to the couple. But if it's not going to make a difference to them, if they're not going to appreciate it, and it's not really going to affect the impact of the overall day, well, then it might not be worth it. For example, these photos right here, I'm seeing in the grid view, we've got some food sitting on these different plates. So I could crop in, but then I would lose the bride. Or I could go through and try and remove in Photoshop or with the object remove tool in every single one of these photos. Is that going to make a difference to the bride? Probably not. Probably not. And so I'm not actually going to touch that. Now, the very last thing that I'm going to do before I actually export my photos is I'm going to go in and I'm going to add some denoise to all of the images. So I'm going to go into the detail panel. I'm going to click denoise, and it's just going to denoise this one image. From there, I can actually sync these edits across all of the photos and denoise everything. So we're going to wait for it. You never want to apply denoise image by image by image while you're sitting here waiting for your computer to load, because that would take you forever. It would expand the amount of time you're editing from a day to like 3 days. I'm going to select all the photos, and I'm going to sync everything over. So I'll click sync, make sure I select nothing except for my denoise settings. Okay, so then I'm going to hit synchronize, and it's literally going to go through and apply denoise to every single photo. Now you can have it set at 50, or if you want to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room, maybe just set it down at 30. I find 50 is generally fine. You can do a final pass once you upload the gallery. I do that on Pixie Set, and I'll look at the photos before sending the client the link, and that's really my entire editing process. So I hope this was the right speed, not too slow, not too fast. I'm sure I missed some things. If you do have questions, please leave them in the comments. Otherwise, if you want to see my gear, learn more about the Tourbox, there are links in the description as well as the presets that I used to edit this wedding. I hope this was helpful in some way, shape, or form to help you edit your next wedding. Thanks for keeping me company, and I will see you in the next video. In the meantime, create something awesome. Peace.